right, Space Cadets, it's time for a test. We're going to go through a chess game, and you're going to have to figure out if we are making fair trades or unfair trades. A fair trade is when you capture a piece that's worth 3, and they capture your piece that is also worth 3. As long as both sides have the same number, it's okay. It's a fair trade. If one side gets a bigger number than the other side, then it is not a fair trade, and that side will be winning. So let's look at what this can be like. So let's do some practice before we look at the game. So right here, the pawn can capture the queen or the black pawn. Which one should it capture and why? If you thought you should take the queen, you are correct. And the reason is because the queen is worth 9 pawns and the pawn is worth 1 pawn. So, capturing like this is much better. Let's do another one. The pawn can take the knight or the rook. Which one should the pawn capture? If you answered the rook, you would be correct. And the reason is because the rook is worth 5 and the knight is worth 3. So capturing the rook would be better. Let's do another one. Should the pawn capture the rook or the bishop? If you answered the rook, you are correct, because the bishop is worth 3 pawns and the rook is worth 5 pawns. All right, let's do 2 more. This time we have a choice of 3 things we can capture, and we're using a bishop instead of a pawn. So, should the bishop take the rook? Should it take the bishop? Or should it take the queen? If you answered the queen, you were correct, because the queen is worth 9 pawns, whereas the rook and the bishop are worth 5 pawns and 3 pawns. Even if our bishop could take both the rook and the bishop at the same time, that would only be 8 points, because 5 plus 3 is 8. So 9 pawns is better. So that's why taking the queen is best. All right, let's look at this example. We have a choice. We have a knight that can take one of 2 different rooks or this pawn. Which piece should the knight capture? Very good. The answer is either rook. However, there is an important situation happening. We cannot actually take this rook right now, because the rook has put us in check. So we actually have to take this rook, because you cannot make a move that keeps your king in check. However, if you answered either rook, that is acceptable, because you do understand that these are both worth the same amount of points. They're both worth 5, and both of the rooks are worth more than this pawn is. But in this situation, because of check, we have to take that rook. Okay, now I'm removing the arrows. So I'm going to ask you 2 questions now. The first question is, how many pieces can this queen capture? How many pieces is she looking at? If you answered 3, you would be correct because she can take any one of these 3 pieces. If you answered 4, you would be wrong because she cannot actually see the king. The king is over this way. So she cannot actually try to target this king, although you can't capture the king in it. But the answer is 3. Now the next question is, which one of these 3 should the queen capture? If you answered the rook, you would be correct because the rook is worth 5, whereas the bishop and the knight are both worth 3. And if we take the bishop, they'll get our queen. That would be bad. And if we take the knight, the rook can get our queen. So that's a different reason for why we need to take the rook. It's the only safe capture as well. So let's look at one more. Actually, we're going to look at several more, but let's look at another one. So, how many pieces can the white rook see? The answer is, again, 3. You can see the bishop, the knight, and the rook. Now, which one should the white rook capture? The answer is the rook, because the knight and the bishop are both worth 3. But for fun, which one is a better piece to capture? The bishop or the knight? Which one is better to capture if you didn't capture the rook? The answer is the knight, because if you take the bishop, the rook will see us, and the rook will take the rook like that, and then we won't even have a rook anymore, and that would be very sad. So, the best answer is take the rook. The second best answer is we could take the knight because we don't lose our rook if we take the knight. And the worst answer is take the bishop because we lose a rook. All right, let's try again. Which piece should the white king capture and why? You could also think about how many pieces can the white king capture? Let's start with that. If you think the white king can capture 2 pieces, you are incorrect. The white king can only capture 1 piece, and that's the rook. If I try to capture the bishop, the black rook would still see me, see? In which case, I would be in check, and that's breaking the rules. So, while it looks like the king can take 2 pieces, because of the special rules of check, he can only take the rook. Let's look at, oh, Professor Marmus is back. Let's look at this capture. So, here's a different type of capture choice that you have not been shown yet. This pawn can capture this rook, and the king can capture this bishop. So we have a situation where we have a choice where we have 2 different pieces that can capture one of 2 different pieces. So which piece should we use to make a capture? Should we use the pawn to capture the rook or the king to capture the bishop? Which one is best and why? The answer is we will capture the rook because it is worth 5 pawns and the bishop would have been only worth 3 pawns. So very good if you got that right. We're going to do one more. A little trickier. So in this situation, we have a king that can capture this bishop, and we have a knight that can capture one of 2 different things. So the question is, what piece should we capture and why? Oh, don't give them the answer, Professor Marmus. The answer is we should capture the knight. This is a little bit tricky, and if you didn't get that right, that's okay. If you capture the bishop, you are getting 3 pawns, but then they can take your knight and they also get 3 pawns. If you capture their knight, you'll notice the bishop cannot take your knight, so you would keep your knight instead of losing it. Taking the pawn is also okay, but it's not the best move. It would be best to capture the knight. You won't lose your knight, though, if you take over here, but you would only be getting 1 pawn instead of 3 pawns.